This is a good example for one of the cases in our research study. Someone has been informed in an after-death contact where the car keys that belonged to his deceased father's car were located. He couldn't find his father's car keys, and he got that information, just a very practical kind of message. But it is also reported that there are messages which are a lot more profound. How the deceased person had been experiencing the process of dying and how he had felt, what exactly had happened, how it occurred, and why he had died. Those are the details of information that are most interesting for the deceased's family, especially when they are informed that death was a lot more beautiful for the deceased than they had imagined.
Ms. Elsaesser, you've been working in thanatology, the field of scientific research on death and dying, for many years. You've written books about the subject, and you are also doing research. A recent project, and in my eyes a very important project, is your research study of after-death contacts. For everyone who has not yet heard of these phenomena, what exactly are after-death contacts?
One can experience an after-death contact if the awareness is conducted with 4 of our 5 senses. You can see or hear a deceased person, you can smell them, or you can get the impression that you are being touched by them. That is the typical range of after-death contacts. The most common type of after-death contacts are encounters with deceased people during your sleep. About half of the people involved wake up with the impression that they had just had an encounter with a deceased person. Those after-death contact experiences develop in the same way as the ones while someone is awake. The other half involved in after-death contacts during their sleep do not wake up. They keep on sleeping while having an encounter with a deceased person, but it feels absolutely different to them than a dream. They report that it had been a lot more real, a lot more authentic than a dream, and they report that they have had very clear memories of that encounter. Years later, they are convinced that it was not just a dream.
How common are such after-death contacts?
Studies show that about 40 to 50% of the people who are grieving the loss of a loved one do experience after-death contacts. We have not been involved in a prospective study, but we have developed our own research, and we find that these numbers are correct. A quarter of those people were not grieving. They either received a message for someone else who is grieving the loss of a loved one, or they have had an encounter with a deceased person they didn't even know. So a quarter of the people experiencing after-death contacts are not in grieving. But generally speaking, after-death contacts are connected with the loss of a loved person, a family member, or a dear friend.
This means that after-death contacts must be pretty common in our society, but no one talks about them.
That is exactly why we are doing research on it. After-death contacts are very frequent phenomena, and nobody really talks about them. They have not been discussed openly in our society, the media is barely reporting anything about it, and there are only very few books that have been written about them. There are not many research studies either, and that has been the motivation for us to conduct a study on our own.
What is the most common type of after-death contact that people tell you about?
That's the after-death contacts during their sleep. I can give you the exact numbers. 62.2% of after-death contacts take place while people are sleeping. Half of those people wake up from it. Then we have the tactile after-death contacts. 47.7% are felt as touch. And then we have visual after-death contacts, which are very impressive, by the way. with 46.2%. 43.3% are heard. These are audio after-death contacts. 34.4% of them experience the feeling of a presence. They have the perception that the deceased person is present in the same room. They know where the deceased is located in the room. They feel him standing in front of them, next to them, or somewhere else in the same room, but they cannot see him, hear, touch, or smell him. But they are convinced that the deceased person is present in the same room with them. And then the last number are the olfactory after-death contacts, where people have encounters that include their sense of smell. These are 27.9%. Our research is conducted by a very detailed questionnaire of 194 questions. We have put it online in various social media channels and platforms, as well as on my website. And more than 1,000 people have taken part in it. 1,004 people exactly.
You have found that most people experience an after-death contact in their sleep. About half of them wake up immediately afterwards. What exactly is such an encounter like?
One can imagine such an after-death contact like this. You are asleep and you have a random dream. Suddenly, your deceased father shows up in this dream, and you wake up and suddenly your deceased father is standing in front of you and you have a conversation with him. That's the sort of after-death contacts that take place when people wake up. The other half of after-death contacts during sleep is different. You are asleep and your deceased father shows up and you have a conversation with him, and you wake up and you know that you have had an encounter with your deceased father. You know exactly what has been said in the conversation, and you know that it was not a dream. The interesting thing is that some people who are grieving the death of a loved one have had several dreams that included the deceased person. They knew these were dreams, but then they have an after-death contact encounter and they immediately recognize the difference. This experience was absolutely different from a dream. They can totally tell the difference between a dream and an after-death contact while sleeping.
That's the difference, the intensity and the sustainability of it.
The intensity and sustainability of it, and the fact that they can recall every detail of it, even after 10 years, as if it had happened yesterday.
In the science of thanatology, it was possible to find out that some aspects of near-death experiences are part of the procedure, even if they are described differently. Are there some elements of after-death contacts that are also an important part of these experiences?
I would absolutely agree that the most important element of such connections are the emotions and the information they received. Essentially, it doesn't matter if you have seen, felt, smelled, or heard the deceased. The important thing is always what has happened. It's always about feelings, about emotions, about love and care. The deceased try to get in touch with the living, and if an after-death contact has happened, this attempt has been successful. And once that happens, it's all about giving out some kind of information to the living. Mostly, the deceased wants to comfort the living, telling them that they should stop crying, that they are doing fine and okay, and that the living should not be sad, that everything is well as it is. But the most important thing is always the exchange of emotion and information. Especially interesting are those cases where the living received information in an after-death contact that they haven't had before. And we have been especially careful in examining those cases. It is actually possible to get information in an after-death contact that you have had no clue about before. Not something you have suppressed or forgotten, but something that you absolutely didn't know.
Could you give us an example of such after-death contacts?
This is a good example for one of the cases in our research study. Someone has been informed in an after-death contact where the car keys that belonged to his deceased father's car were located. He couldn't find his father's car keys, and he got that information, just a very practical kind of message. But it is also reported that there are messages which are a lot more profound. How the deceased person had been experiencing the process of dying and how he had felt, what exactly had happened, how it occurred, and why he had died. Those are the details of information that are most interesting for the deceased's family, especially when they are informed that death was a lot more beautiful for the deceased than they had imagined.
So after-death contacts are very helpful in the process of mourning.
They are an immense help. And we can give you all the numbers you could wish for. We have been able to show and prove that after-death contacts are a huge help and supportive when it comes to fighting grief. Grief does not disappear overnight because of an after-death contact. The deceased is still physically absent, and it will stay that way. He is gone and won't come back. But the beautiful and comforting feeling is to know that the connection between the living and the deceased is still there. Not in the same way, you must go on living on your own. That's a fact. But the connection is still there, simply in a more subtle manner.
What would you say are the most important insights that you have gained in your research study? Was there something beautiful or even surprising as a result?
What we have found out is that after-death contacts are extremely important for the people involved. It is a wonderful experience that has a huge impact on them, an experience that stays with them for years, that comforts them and helps them to live on their own. I also have some numbers for you. 36.4% of the people involved said that the after-death contact has changed their lives completely. And 49.1% said that their after-death contact was very important to them. These are some interesting numbers. And regarding the process of grieving, we have asked some detailed questions as well. Concerning grief and emotional healing, 73.4% said that the after-death contact was very comforting, healing, and helpful. It's not quite 100%, but maybe we can explain that because of the 8% of people who didn't know the deceased person that they had encountered and were not grieving in the first place. Then we also asked ourselves, maybe it's because of the short time span of these after-death contacts. These contacts are very brief, mostly a few seconds or a few minutes. Imagine you can see your deceased father for a few seconds, or your partner, or your spouse. Seeing them for just a few seconds might make it even harder because they have come back, but only for a few seconds and then they're gone again. Maybe it could feel like losing them a second time. And then we asked this question, and for 80.4%, it was not emotionally painful to have these short after-death contacts. Why wasn't it painful for them? Probably because they have realized during that after-death contact that the bond between them and the deceased is still intact. No matter if there was a visual contact or not, the connection is there.
Have people who experience an after-death contact always been sure that life doesn't end with death? Is there a correlation between their after-death contacts and their own philosophical attitudes and perceptions of life and death?
We have also covered that question regarding the belief life after death. 68.8% believed in its existence before the after-death contact. But afterwards, 92.8% believed in life after death. Moreover, after this experience, 94.6% were convinced that deceased people can get in contact with the living. This means that for them, there's no doubt that this experience was real, no matter what their environment thinks about the after-death contact, and no matter if they believe them or not, they are convinced that this was a real encounter.
This means that it is not necessary for an after-death contact to believe in life after death, but people who have experienced after-death contacts are convinced that the deceased can get in touch with the living.
Exactly. We have also shown in our research that philosophical or religious convictions are no requirement for experiencing an after-death contact. Atheists and agnostics have the same probability to experience an after-death contact as people who have religious beliefs. It has nothing to do with religious convictions. Also, religious attitudes don't significantly change because of an after-death contact, but spirituality doubles. That is a proof that it doesn't depend on religion. It depends on a spiritual worldview, and that changes because of an after-death contact. You do not become more of a Catholic, you do not become more of a Muslim, and you do not become more of a Buddhist, but you become a more spiritual person, and exactly twice as much. It doubles. And that's a significant difference.
And do people become less of a Catholic, less of a Buddhist?
Well, I think it's the same situation as with people who had a near-death experience. They might still attend church because it's also a social network. You meet friends there and so on. But they don't really need the approval of a priest or a pastor or a rabbi anymore because of what they have experienced. They know what they believe in. They have experienced it. Their experience is so strong that they do not need an institution to help them to find faith. It's an experience, and they know that's how it happened, that's my truth, and that works for me.
We live in a very naturalistic and materialistic world. What is the importance of after-death contacts as a message that consciousness is also possible outside of the body?
When we decided to go ahead with the research study, we agreed to do it as scientifically perfect as possible. I am working with a British professor and an American professor. There are also other people involved that are all academics. We have developed a methodically coherent research study that is based on scientific proven evidence. Our intention was to prove that you can examine spiritual experiences with scientific methods. That was the whole point of it. And we have received a very positive response from academics towards our research study. We are convinced that the more research is conducted on such spiritual topics, the more science will be interested in such fields. And the more surveys are produced, the more we can influence the science world from within. We don't want to make a revolution. That's not the idea. That's not our intention. We want to use scientific methods to explain or to try to explain spiritual experiences of people. For us, it's all about these personal experiences. We're not trying to prove that there is life after death. Our goal is to examine what these people have experienced. What is the bottom of it? What exactly does change in their lives? How helpful is it for them? And because we know that the occurrence of after-death contacts is almost half of the population in all countries of the world, since we believe it's a global phenomenon, we examine all aspects about them, especially the meaning of them for the people involved and the help they get from these encounters.
As you've mentioned earlier, there are academics involved on an international level. Who exactly are those people?
Our team here in Switzerland consists of 4 people. We are the core team, the people who have done the workload that was required. And that is my colleague, Professor Dr. Chris Rowe, his assistant, Dr. Callum Cooper from the University of Northampton in England, and David Lorimer from the Scientific and Medical Network. That is the core team. And then we have an academic advisory board with Dr. Kim Penberthy from the University of Virginia, Professor Peter Fenwick from Britain, and Professor Kenneth Ring, my dear friend. We have received an amazing feedback from them. They were excited about our results, excited about our work, and it was a wonderful working experience.
Do you think that the same process could take place for after-death contacts as it did with near-death experiences, that people can talk about them more freely, because the term near-death experience is by now well established in society?
That's really the purpose of our work. That's what we want to achieve. And we are just at the beginning. We won't put the research on after-death contacts aside. We will continue to work on that subject, as long as it takes for people to start talking about after-death contacts freely and openly, without people smiling about it, without not believing them, without telling them that they are depressed and that they're just grieving and making it all up. We want for people to be able to talk about after-death contacts freely and openly, and the results of our research study are available for everyone. And then everyone is entitled to its own opinion. No matter if people believe it or not, anyone is free to believe whatever he wants, and that's no problem. Our job is to make the information and the research study available to the public.
What exactly is the reason for you to do research on after-death contacts? Why are you so interested in this subject? Is there a personal reason for that?
Yes, there was a trigger. As you know, I have been working on near-death experiences for a long time. And after 20 or 25 years doing research on that, I decided that we know everything there is to know about near-death experiences. I wanted to do research on another subject, and I translated a book about consolation from another world called Hello from Heaven by Judy and Bill Guggenheim. It's a well-known bestseller. And while I was translating this book from English to French, I grew more and more excited about those after-death contacts and how beautiful these after-death contacts were. And when I had finished my translation, I was convinced that it was time for me to write my own book about after-death contacts. And then I have written my own book. And I wrote it in French, and now it's already published in Italian and Spanish and German. And after that, I received so many emails from people who have had after-death contacts on their own. And I was asking myself what to do with such beautiful reports about such phenomena. And then I developed a project that I introduced to the Salvia Foundation. And they were ready to grant us a generous support for our research study. And then I put together a team that was supposed to be as international as possible, because we wanted to examine closely if there do exist cultural differences between countries or between regions of the world with different religions or not. Then we conducted a quantitative addition of all those data available to us. Just imagine 194 questions answered by more than 1,000 people. That is a huge data bank information. In the beginning, we have asked people involved in the questionnaire to describe their own after-death contacts in their own words as free texts. For this question alone, we have received answers with a data bank of more than 2 million words. We are still busy evaluating these descriptions. We have finished the quantitative results of our survey. That's available in our brochure, and the qualitative analysis is being conducted in different teams, in different countries that we're working on now.
So your study is not finished yet. That qualitative analysis is still going on?
Exactly. That is still going on, to look into the details of the qualitative analysis. We also have a project to make that same questionnaire available in Germany.
What about people without a scientific background? How do they get a chance to read the results of your research study?
Yes, with pleasure. That's why we have made 2 different brochures about our research results. One of them is titled Reports about Personal Experiences. In this brochure, you get a lot of statistics, but also a lot of personal reports. And it's always very uplifting and beautiful to read all of those different descriptions of after-death contacts. The other brochure is a pile of all quantitative analysis results, but without the reports about personal experiences. These 2 brochures aren't aiming the same readers. Some people aren't interested in too many statistics and are no academics. And they probably would much rather enjoy the descriptions of after-death contacts by a lot of different people. And scientists, on the other hand, might prefer to read just these statistics. These 2 brochures are available in 3 languages: English, Spanish, and French. I am happy to send them to anyone who writes to me. On my website, there is my email address. And it's enough to write which version you would like to have. And I will send them to you with great pleasure as a PDF version.
Can you think of another phenomenon that is dealing with a topic around death or a different kind of awareness that should also be studied?
Absolutely. We will be analyzing and doing research with our current topic, after-death contacts, but something we are also interested in is deathbed visions. Maybe as a side-by-side project, or maybe after our current research study, because the deathbed visions are very close to after-death contacts. In one chapter of my book about after-death contacts, I also talk about deathbed visions. I have listed the parallel elements of both phenomena. They are pretty similar, but the main difference is that these experiences aren't made by healthy people, but by dying people. That is something we are very, very much interested in.
Ms. Elsaesser, thank you very much for the insights from your research study and for this interview, and all the best for your future. I presume there will be future research studies as well?
Oh, definitely. Thanks to you too.